In 2021, scientists did something that seemed impossible. At a depth of about 11.5 feet in the permafrost of Yakutia, they found something that completely changed our understanding of the line between life and death. It started as a normal drilling operation, a science expedition, laboratory work, standard procedures. But what they pulled from the ancient ice made even experienced researchers freeze in disbelief. A creature the size of the tip of a needle, so tiny that it could only be seen under a microscope. But when the scientists thawed the sample, something amazing happened. The creature came back to life. After being frozen in the ice for 24,000 years, this tiny being simply shook itself and started moving, like it had just woken up from a regular night's sleep. But that was only the beginning of the real miracle. Deloid rotifer, that's the name of this microscopic wonder, didn't just come back to life. It immediately started to reproduce. Without a partner, without mating, just making exact copies of itself. Imagine this. A creature falls asleep when mammoths and saber-toothed tigers walk the earth and wakes up in the age of smartphones and space travel. But its small size is misleading. Under a microscope, this creature is incredibly complex. It has a brain, a digestive system, muscles, and reproductive organs. It's a full living organism packed into something smaller than a grain of sand. It's like fitting an entire city inside a speck of salt. Rotifers got their name from their special way of moving. They spin tiny invisible wheels around their mouths, making whirlpools to catch food. These wheel animals were first discovered in the late 1600s, but their abilities still surprise scientists today. The secret of their survival lies in a state called cryptobiosis. Imagine an organism putting life on pause. Its metabolism stops so completely that modern machines can't detect any signs of life. No heartbeat, no breathing. But this isn't death. It's something between life and death, a kind of suspended animation. In this state, a rotifer becomes almost invincible. Total dehydration? Not a problem. Scientists removed every bit of water from a rotifer's body, turning it into dry dust. Years later, just a drop of water was enough to bring it back to life. Cosmic radiation? Easy. Temperatures near absolute zero? No problem. NASA and the European Space Agency sent these creatures into open space aboard orbiting stations. The results shocked everyone. They calmly survived vacuum, microgravity, and radiation 1,000 times stronger than what we face on Earth. In 2007, thousands of rotifers were launched into low Earth orbit in special containers. For 10 days, they floated in the empty silence of space, exposed to ultraviolet light that would kill any other living thing instantly. When the containers came back to Earth, most of the rotifers just shook themselves and went on living like nothing had happened. But how do they do it? The key lies in special bodyguard proteins called chaperones. When extreme conditions hit, these tiny protectors surround important parts of the cell and stop them from falling apart. They work like microscopic repair teams, fixing damage at the molecular level. Even more amazing, rotifers can repair their own DNA after it's been completely broken apart by radiation. Their genome can be shredded into hundreds of pieces, but special enzymes patiently put it back together like a puzzle. Scientists still don't fully understand how that's possible. There's one more incredible thing about rotifers. They've learned how to steal, not gold or jewels. They steal genes. Up to 10% of their DNA comes from borrowed genetic material from bacteria, fungi, and plants. This is called horizontal gene transfer. When other organisms' cells break down, rotifers grab useful genetic instructions and insert them into their own DNA. A gene for radiation resistance from a bacterium like Deinococcus radiodurans? Sure. The ability to break down toxic chemicals from plants? No problem. Cold resistance genes from Arctic fish? They take those too. They rebuild themselves like biological Lego, adding helpful abilities from other life forms. This kind of evolutionary theft has helped turn them into nearly immortal superorganisms. But the most shocking discovery came when scientists compared rotifers to their closest relatives, tardigrades. These water bears are also famous for surviving extreme conditions, but rotifers have beaten even them. Tardigrades can stay in cryptobiosis for up to 30 years. Rotifers, tens of thousands of years. In lab experiments, rotifers were exposed to things that would kill thousands of human generations. They were hit with X-rays, frozen in liquid nitrogen, and even heated to boiling. Most of them survived and kept reproducing. This breaks all the rules of evolution. Normally, species that reproduce without mating die out quickly because they lack genetic variety. But rotifers have existed for millions of years and have split into over 450 species. In normal conditions, these creatures live only a couple of weeks. But when they face extreme situations, they turn into something close to immortal. You can freeze them, dry them out, blast them with radiation, and they'll wait for better days, even for 1,000,000 years. And here's where things get really exciting. Studying rotifers led to a breakthrough that could change the future of humanity. Scientists realized if a tiny creature can sleep for tens of thousands of years and wake up unharmed, why not try applying the same idea to people? For the first time in history, we have a real roadmap to immortality. Not poetic or symbolic immortality, actual physical immortality through cryogenic freezing. Rotifers showed us that the secret isn't to stop aging, but to stop time itself for the body. Their chaperone proteins became the focus of intense study. If we can reproduce their effect in human cells, the possibilities are endless. Imagine, a person with a deadly illness is placed in cryptobiosis until a cure is found. That could happen in 10, 100, or 1,000 years. For them, it would feel like an instant. Astronauts could sleep during long trips to distant stars. People could survive planet-wide disasters by sleeping through them in safe shelters. The first experiments have already started. Several biotech companies in the US and Japan are working on artificial chaperone proteins for human cells. Others are exploring horizontal gene transfer, adding parts of rotifer DNA into the human genome to give us resistance to extreme conditions. Of course, we're still far from making this practical. The human body is billions of times more complex than a rotifer, but the simple fact that nature has already solved the problem of real immortality gives us hope. Rotifers also challenge our ideas about the origin of life. Their ability to survive in space supports the ancient theory of panspermia, the idea that life might have traveled between planets, hidden inside meteorites or cosmic dust. Maybe our earliest ancestors also came to Earth in frozen form, riding on chunks of ice through deep space for billions of years. And maybe someday we'll go to other worlds the same way, using cryptobiosis learned from these tiny rotifers. The discovery in the frozen ground of Yakutia became a turning point in human history. For the first time, we have not just a theory of immortality, but a working, living example. If a microscopic creature can sleep for 24,000 years and wake up as if nothing happened, then the barrier between life and death can be crossed. Maybe in a few decades, cryogenic freezing will be as common as heart surgery is today. And it will all be thanks to a tiny being that taught us the greatest secret of the universe: how to beat time. But the rotifer wasn't the only sensational discovery hidden in the ice. In September 1991, German tourists Helmut and Erika Simon were hiking in the Ötztal Alps when they stumbled upon something they first assumed was the body of a fallen mountaineer. It was Otzi, a man who had stepped straight out of the Copper Age into the 21st century. The first test revealed something incredible. The body was 5,300 years old. Otzi had died at a time when humans were just beginning to work with metal, and the pyramids of Egypt had not yet been built. The alpine ice had preserved him so perfectly that scientists were able to reconstruct details of his life with the precision of a forensic investigation. And it turned out that Otzi was the victim of the oldest solved murder in human history. A flint arrowhead was found embedded in his shoulder, but that was just the beginning. Wounds on his hands showed that he had fought for his life. On his clothes and weapons, scientists found blood from 4 different people. A true Bronze Age massacre. Forensic experts reconstructed the events with chilling accuracy. On the tip of one arrow, they found the blood of 2 different people, meaning Otzi had wounded or killed 2 attackers with a single arrow. Blood from a 3rd person was found on torn pieces of his clothing. The 4th blood trace belonged to Otzi himself. The last meal of this ancient man included wild goat meat, bread, and ferns. Pollen found in his stomach allowed scientists to determine Not only the time of year, late spring or early summer, but also that 2 days before his death, he had descended to a valley just 4,000 feet above sea level. Isotope analysis of the enamel on his teeth revealed even more surprising facts. Otzi was born and raised in the Asarco Valley, about 37 miles from where he died. But hair analysis showed that in the last months of his life, he had traveled frequently between the mountains and valleys. His hair contained high levels of copper and arsenic, a clear sign that Otzi had worked with metal. He may have been a smelter or a blacksmith, making him a very important and wealthy figure in his time. Back then, copper was more valuable than gold. One of the most astonishing discoveries was Otzi's tattoos. His body had 61 markings, thin lines made not with a needle, but with small cuts rubbed with charcoal. But it was the placement of these tattoos that shocked researchers. They were located precisely on acupuncture points used today in traditional Chinese medicine. That means that 5,000 years ago, acupuncture may have been practiced in the Alps to treat joint pain. Otzi suffered from arthritis. His joints were badly worn, which isn't surprising for a 45-year-old man of that era who walked extensively in the mountains. Otzi also carried a kind of first aid kit. In his bag were pieces of birch fungus, a natural antibiotic still used by traditional healers today. There were also seeds and leaves from medicinal plants. This ancient man had knowledge of healing. His clothing showed incredible craftsmanship and design. A bearskin hat with leather straps protected him from the wind. His cloak, made of goat hides, was sewn from multicolored strips into a complex pattern. Not just clothing, but a work of art. Tall gaiters, a loincloth, even grass socks. Every item was functional and well thought out. His shoes were a masterpiece of ancient design. The soles were made of bear skin, the tops from deer skin, and the inside was insulated with straw and lined with a mesh of grass for ventilation. They were perfectly suited for long journeys on alpine trails. But the most valuable item was a copper axe with a 24-inch wooden handle. This was advanced technology for its time. Metal analysis revealed a surprise. The copper had been mined in southern Tuscany, hundreds of miles away. This suggests well-established trade routes, or that Otzi himself was a merchant dealing in metal. But the most astonishing discovery came in 2019. Using cutting-edge technology, Italian researchers managed to reconstruct Otzi's voice. They created a 3D model of his larynx and vocal cords, factoring in the size of his chest cavity and nasal passages. It turned out that the voice of this ancient man sounded remarkably modern, a deep baritone between 100 and 150 hertz, just like an average man today. When scientists played the sound, many listeners got chills. For the first time in 5,000 years, a Stone Age man spoke again. DNA analysis revealed even more surprises. Otzi had brown eyes, dark hair, and tan skin. He was lactose intolerant, had a genetic predisposition to heart disease, and may have been going bald. In his blood, scientists found DNA from the bacteria that causes Lyme disease, making him the oldest known case in history. The most shocking revelation, Otzi has living relatives. Geneticists found 19 men in modern-day Tyrol who are direct descendants of Otzi through their paternal line. Their ancestor died 5,000 years ago, but his bloodline lives on. Unfortunately, Otzi's story is also surrounded by eerie coincidences. Since his discovery, several people connected to his study have died under strange circumstances. Helmut Simon, who found Otzi, froze to death in the same mountains in 2004. His body was found lying in the same pose as the Iceman. Kurt Fritz, the mountain guide, died in an avalanche. Rainer Hölzel, the only journalist to film the removal of the mummy, died of a brain tumor. Helmut Simon died during a snowstorm in the exact area where he had found Otzi 13 years earlier. Konrad Spindler, the archaeologist who led the research, died of a rare disease at age 65. In just 20 years, 7 people connected to the discovery had died. Journalists dubbed it Otzi's curse, comparing it to the legendary curse of the pharaohs. Of course, statistically, it could be just coincidence, but the mystical aura around the Iceman only grew stronger. Forensic scientists were able to reconstruct the last days of Otzi's life with detective-like precision. 2 days before his death, he descended into a valley and took part in a violent confrontation. Wounded, he climbed back into the mountains, perhaps fleeing pursuers or carrying out an important mission. At an altitude of 10,500 feet, his killer caught up with him. An arrow struck his back below the shoulder blade, piercing his lung and damaging major blood vessels. Otzi bled out in minutes. The killer didn't even take the valuable copper axe. Either he was in a hurry or feared being followed. The body quickly froze and was buried under snow, which turned to ice and preserved the evidence for millennia. Otzi became a cryogenic time capsule, carrying the story of life and death from the Stone Age to the modern world. The discovery of Otzi completely changed our understanding of Copper Age humans. They were not primitive cave dwellers, but people with advanced medicine, complex technology, long-distance trade networks, and rich culture. And sadly, like us, they also knew how to kill one another. The Iceman became a symbol that human nature hasn't changed much over thousands of years. Love and hate, greed and generosity, knowledge and superstition, all of it existed already 5,000 years ago in the Alpine valleys. If the rotifer amazed us with its ability to resurrect after tens of thousands of years of freezing, practically immortal through cryptobiosis, then Otzi stunned the world with the incredible details of human history frozen in time. But the next discoveries would shock scientists not just with individual survival stories, but with the possibility of bringing entire extinct species back to life. In May 2007, a reindeer herder named Yuri Kuti made an incredible discovery in the upper reaches of the Uribe River, the perfectly preserved body of a baby mammoth. The little female was named Lyuba, after the discoverer's wife. But the story behind this find turned out to be no less dramatic than the mammoth calf's own fate. Lyuba died around 42,000 years ago, at just 1 month old. Her preservation was so exceptional that even her eyelashes and tiny ear hairs remained intact. She weighed about 66 pounds and stood 3 feet tall, roughly the size of a large dog, with short legs and a long trunk. Yuri Kuti immediately recognized how valuable the discovery was, but according to Nenet's beliefs, he didn't touch the mammoth with his bare hands. Instead, he went to consult a friend and inform the authorities. But when he returned with a helicopter and a team of scientists, Lyuba was gone. What followed was a true detective story. While Kuti had gone for help, another man had stumbled upon the mammoth and simply taken her to a nearby village called Novi Port. There, he dumped her next to a local shop, like a bag of garbage. Local dogs began chewing on the carcass. They bit off Lyuba's right ear and part of her tail before residents realized what the strange object actually was. Fortunately, the damage was mostly superficial. Her internal organs, skeleton, and the majority of her body remained untouched. When Lyuba was finally brought to a lab, researchers uncovered the tragic story of her death. Her mouth and airways were clogged with mud and clay. She had drowned after falling into a muddy pit. It's likely she strayed from the herd and tried to drink from a swampy pond, but her short legs couldn't hold her on the slippery bank. Stomach contents revealed she was still nursing, but had just begun sampling adult food. Bits of plants were found in her intestines. She was a healthy, well-fed calf with a prominent fat hump on the back of her neck, a natural energy reserve for surviving the cold. 3 years later, an even more sensational discovery overshadowed Lyuba. In 2010, mammoth ivory hunters in Yakutia found Yuka, a juvenile mammoth around 6 to 8 years old who had died 28,000 years ago. Yuka shocked scientists with an unexpected surprise. At first glance, her body was hollow, missing most of its internal organs, many bones, and a large portion of muscle. Someone or something had carefully butchered the carcass like a skilled butcher. Claw and bite marks from a cave lion were found on the skin, but most striking were the clean cuts that could only have been made by human hands. The incisions followed precise anatomical lines, proving the ancient butcher had excellent knowledge of mammoth anatomy. For the first time, scientists had undeniable evidence that early humans hunted mammoths. The reconstructed scene was this. Cave lions had chased the young mammoth into a boggy area, where it got stuck. Then Stone Age hunters arrived and finished off the wounded animal. They butchered it on the spot, taking everything valuable: meat, fat, organs, even bone marrow. What they couldn't carry, they left behind: the hide, bones, and some muscle tissue. The carcass sank into the swamp, where the permafrost preserved it for thousands of years. But the most astonishing discovery was waiting inside Yuka's skull, her brain, the first and only mammoth brain ever found intact. Brain tissue is made up of 90% water and fat, so it almost never survives over millennia. This was nothing short of a miracle. Not only was the brain preserved, it was in remarkably good condition. Scientists could distinguish specific structures, study neural connections, and even extract tissue samples for DNA analysis. Japanese researchers from Kindai University managed to extract cells with intact nuclei from Yuka's bone marrow and muscle tissues. This seemed impossible. The nuclei should have broken down after thousands of years. But when these ancient cells were placed into mouse egg cells that had had their own nuclei removed, something extraordinary happened. 21% of the mammoth cells began forming pre-division structures. For the first time in 28,000 years, mammoth cells came to life and attempted to replicate. They responded to modern biochemical signals and acted like living cells. This discovery instantly shifted mammoth cloning from science fiction to scientific possibility. If these ancient cells could activate, that meant they contained enough information to potentially recreate an entire organism. Lyuba and Yuka became symbols of the most ambitious biological project in history, the resurrection of extinct species. South Korean scientists announced plans to clone a mammoth by 2026. The American company Colossal Biosciences raised $75 million in funding to bring mammoths back to life. Modern CRISPR gene editing technology allows researchers to insert mammoth DNA into the genome of an Asian elephant with surgical precision. Embryos have already been created with genes responsible for thick fur, cold resistance, ear shape, and other mammoth traits. Scientist Sergei Zimov took it even further. In Yakutia, he established the Pleistocene Park, a vast area where he's trying to recreate the original mammoth steppe ecosystem. The park now includes Yakutian horses, reindeer, musk oxen, all animals that once coexisted with mammoths. Zimov proved something remarkable. When large herbivores trample snow, the ground freezes deeper, grasses grow better, and the permafrost doesn't melt. Mammoths could become a living weapon against global warming. An adult mammoth weighed 6 tons and ate 660 pounds of vegetation per day. A herd of 1,000 mammoths could flatten snow across vast tundra landscapes, preventing the permafrost from thawing and releasing enormous amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The discoveries in Siberia showed that mammoths weren't just giant elephants, they were living ecosystem engineers that helped balance entire continents. In winter, they flattened snow so light could reach the grass below. In summer, they fertilized the soil and spread seeds through their dung. But the Resurrection Project has raised difficult ethical questions. Do we have the right to bring back species that nature has already let go? Where will cloned mammoths live? How will they fit into today's ecosystems? Some scientists warn that resurrected mammoths might turn out to be genetic monsters, hybrids of ancient and modern DNA that can't survive in the wild. Others argue that the money would be better spent saving endangered species that are disappearing right now. But supporters of the project believe that if we can bring mammoths back, we must. Lyuba and Yuka aren't just museum pieces. They're seeds of the future, frozen in time and waiting for their moment. Perhaps in just a few decades, mammoths will once again roam the Arctic tundra. Children will see them not in museums, but in the wild. And it all began with the tragic story of little Lyuba, who drowned in a muddy pit 42,000 years ago, never knowing she would become the key to resurrecting her kind. But it's not only ancient creatures that find refuge in the ice. Sometimes the cold preserves human tragedies as well, turning them into time capsules that tell chilling stories about the price of human ambition. In May 1845, Sir John Franklin set sail from London to search for a sea route from the Atlantic to the Pacific through the Canadian Arctic, commanding 2 ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. On board were 129 of the Royal Navy's finest sailors, 3 years' worth of canned food, and the most advanced equipment of the time. It was the expedition of a lifetime. The ships were reinforced with steel plates to navigate the ice, equipped with steam engines and heating systems. The onboard library held 1,200 books, including works by Dickens and scientific journals. There was even an organ for Sunday services, but all of it vanished without a trace. The last time Europeans saw Franklin's ships was in August 1845 in Baffin Bay. After that, complete silence. The expedition seemed to disappear into the Arctic ice, leaving behind only questions and legends. For over a century, search teams scoured the Arctic, spending far more money than the original expedition had cost. They found only grim remains, cans stamped with the ship's names, scraps of clothing, human bones bearing teeth marks. The Inuit told terrifying stories about pale men wandering across the ice, eating each other. They spoke of mummified bodies in blue uniforms scattered across the Arctic islands. But Europeans long dismissed these savage tales. The fate of the Franklin expedition became one of the greatest mysteries of the age of exploration. It inspired dozens of books, films, and conspiracy theories. Some claimed the sailors had been killed by Inuit. Others believed they had found the passage and settled somewhere in the Pacific. Then in September 2016, something incredible happened. Canadian researchers discovered HMS Terror in the waters of Terror Bay, off the coast of King William Island, 100 miles from where Inuit last saw the ship in 1848. The vessel lay at a depth of 80 feet in nearly perfect condition. The icy Arctic water, which stays near freezing year-round, had acted as a natural deep freeze. Even the wooden mast stood upright, as if the ship had just dropped anchor. When underwater archaeologists first boarded the wreck, they were met with a scene fit for a horror film. Tables in the officers' mess were set for dinner. Plates, cutlery, even napkins still in place. Beds in the cabins were neatly made with military blankets. Inside the officers' desks were documents, maps, and unsent personal letters, ink pots, quills, books from the ship's library. Everything looked as if the crew had left just yesterday. In the cabins, they found untouched supplies of canned food, medical instruments, and scientific devices for measuring Earth's magnetic field. Even glassware and bottles had survived intact. The Terror had become an underwater museum of the Victorian era. Most disturbing of all, the ship had been carefully sealed. All hatches were shut, cabins tidied, valuables packed. The sailors didn't abandon ship in panic. They left methodically, preparing for a long journey across the ice. 2 years later, the second ship was found, HMS Erebus. It lay 30 miles to the south, also in remarkable condition. Cannons still stood on the deck, ready for battle. In the holds were heaps of coal for the steam engines that never reached their goal. These discoveries allowed researchers to reconstruct the expedition's tragic final years. The ships became icebound in Victoria Strait in September 1846. The crew hoped the ice would melt during the summer of 1847, allowing them to continue. But the Arctic summer was unusually cold. Sir John Franklin died on June 11, 1847. The cause of death unknown, possibly a heart attack or perhaps lead poisoning from canned food. Command then passed to Captain Francis Crozier, a seasoned polar explorer who realized the ships were doomed. On April 22, 1848, after nearly 2 years trapped in the ice, 105 surviving sailors abandoned the ships and set out on foot toward the Back River, the nearest place where they might encounter a rescue party. It was a 250-mile journey over ice and tundra. They dragged boats on sledges, carried food, weapons, even silverware and books. Items utterly useless for survival in the Arctic. As proper Victorian gentlemen, they could not imagine that such civility would become their undoing. What followed was a tragedy that would horrify even Dante. Provisions quickly ran out. Scurvy turned the men into living skeletons. Wounds wouldn't heal, teeth fell out, gangrene set in. One by one, they began to die. Analysis of bones found along their route revealed tooth marks. The sailors had indeed resorted to eating their fallen companions. The Victorian press long denied these savage rumors, but scientific evidence was undeniable. The most horrifying scene came from King William Island. There, a mass grave contained the bones of 11 men. Skull fragments showed axe marks. Long bones bore knife cuts. This wasn't random cannibalism born of madness. Someone had methodically butchered the bodies. The last surviving groups made it to the mainland, but their strength was gone. Inuit continued to find their mummified bodies for decades, preserved by the cold, clothed in the decaying uniforms of the British Navy. Not a single one of the 129 members of the Franklin expedition survived. Their remains are scattered across the Arctic islands over hundreds of miles. Some bodies were so well preserved that modern scientists were able to determine causes of death. The main cause of the disaster turned out to be lead poisoning. At that time, canned food was sealed with lead solder, which leached into the food. Hair analysis revealed lead levels 100 times above normal. This caused hallucinations, paranoia, and mental breakdowns. HMS Terror became a symbol of both human determination and tragic failure. These men ventured farther into the Arctic than anyone before them. They discovered new lands and collected valuable scientific data, but paid the ultimate price. Their ships became monuments to humanity's spirit of exploration, preserved in ice for centuries. Every object on board tells a story of hope and fear, bravery and despair, and of how thin the line is between heroism and madness. The Northwest Passage Franklin sought wasn't fully navigated until 1906 by Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen. And today, due to global warming, that same route has become a regular commercial shipping lane. Terror and Erebus found their final resting place in the icy waters of the Arctic, but their story still haunts us. They remind us that behind every great discovery are human lives, and that nature does not forgive arrogance even in the bravest explorers. In August 2014, Yakut mammoth ivory hunters Semyon Ivanov and his son Zhenya were working along the bank of the Semyonyak River when they came across what they initially thought was a tree trunk sticking out of the permafrost. But as they began to dig around the object, it became clear this wasn't wood. It was something far more valuable. They had discovered a perfectly preserved baby woolly rhinoceros. The little one was named Sasha, the first and only complete body ever found of this legendary extinct animal. Before this, scientists had only bones and fragments of skin to study. Sasha died 39,000 years ago at the age of just 1.5 months. Yet he looked as if he had fallen asleep only yesterday. His skin, ears, tail, thick reddish-brown fur, and even tiny skin folds on his limbs were intact. He weighed just 66 pounds and measured 4 feet in length, roughly the size of a large dog but with short, stocky legs. At first glance, Sasha looked like a plush toy from the Ice Age. His little face was covered in soft fuzz, his small eyes tightly shut, and where a horn would one day grow, there was only a tiny bump. Even his nostrils had retained their shape. Woolly rhinoceroses were among the most impressive and mysterious animals of the Pleistocene. Adults reached the size of modern white rhinos, up to 13 feet long, 6.5 feet tall, and weighing up to 3 tons. But unlike their African relatives, they were covered in a thick coat of fur up to 6 inches long. Their most striking feature was their enormous front horn, which could reach astonishing lengths, up to 6.5 feet. It wasn't made of bone, but of solid keratin, the same material as nails and hair. The horn grew throughout their lives and was used to scrape snow in search of grass. Cave paintings in Chauvet Cave in France, created 30,000 years ago, depict woolly rhinoceroses in stunning detail. The ancient artists portrayed them with remarkable accuracy. Dense fur, massive bodies, and the distinctive humped back. DNA analysis of Sasha revealed a sensational surprise. It turned out that woolly rhinoceroses represented an entirely separate evolutionary line, having diverged from modern rhinos around 50 million years ago. They evolved in isolation for tens of millions of years, becoming truly unique creatures with no close relatives. This meant that woolly rhinos were evolutionary relics, living fossils retaining ancient traits long lost by other species. Their closest modern relatives were found to be Sumatran rhinos, but even they are more genetically distant than humans are from chimpanzees. Analysis of Sasha's stomach contents revealed his final meal. He was still nursing, but had begun sampling solid food. Inside his intestines were traces of young willow and dwarf birch shoots, typical vegetation of the tundra steppe ecosystem. Pollen analysis of the surrounding sediment painted a picture of the world Sasha lived in. 39,000 years ago, the climate was harsher than today, but the region that is now Yakutia was not a barren tundra. It was rich, grassy steppe. Woolly rhinoceroses lived in the so-called mammoth steppe, a unique ecosystem stretching from Spain to Alaska and from the shores of the Arctic Ocean to the Black Sea. These grasslands were incredibly productive, supporting a biomass of large herbivores 10 times greater than that of today's African savanna. Imagine endless plains covered in nutrient-rich grasses where herds of mammoths, bison, horses, and rhinos grazed. Predators, cave lions, short-faced bears, and saber-toothed tigers hunted these giants. It was a world of abundance and danger. Sasha died suddenly, possibly by falling into a river and drowning, or being buried by a snow avalanche during a spring storm. Death came quickly. No silt was found in his lungs, meaning he didn't drown. His body froze instantly in the permafrost, preserving it to this day. Isotope analysis of his teeth revealed an intriguing detail. Sasha's mother had been migrating over vast distances in search of better pastures. The chemical composition of his tooth enamel changed depending on the water and plants she consumed. It created a kind of travel log of the ancient rhino's movements. Woolly rhinos weren't just large grazers. They were living landscape architects. In winter, their massive horns cleared snow to uncover grass, creating feeding grounds for other animals. In summer, they broke up shrubs, preventing the tundra from turning into forest. Their extinction around 10,000 years ago was part of the great Pleistocene megafauna die-off. Along with them disappeared mammoths, cave bears, saber-toothed cats, and giant deer. An entire world of giants vanished within a few millennia. Scientists still debate the reasons for this extinction. There are three main theories: climate change, human hunting, and disease. Most likely, all factors played a role. At the end of the Pleistocene, the climate warmed rapidly. The productive steppe was replaced by boggy tundra in dense forests. The grasses woolly rhinos fed on vanished, giving way to moss and shrubs. At the same time, humans arrived, skilled hunters with spears and bows. Cave paintings depict scenes of rhino hunts. Sadly, ancient humans likely didn't realize they were wiping out the last of a species. The third theory is disease brought by domestic animals. Modern research shows that large wild animals are especially vulnerable to diseases transmitted by livestock. Sasha became a symbol of the lost Pleistocene world. Looking at this tiny rhino, it's easy to imagine how rich and diverse life on Earth was just 10,000 years ago. His discovery reminds us of how fragile ecosystems are and how quickly an entire world can vanish. Today, only 5 species of rhinos remain, and all are critically endangered. The northern white rhino is effectively extinct. Only 2 females are left, both unable to reproduce. The Javan rhino has a population of around 70. Sadly, history is repeating itself, but Sasha gives us hope. His exceptional preservation provided scientists with high-quality woolly rhino DNA. Theoretically, with cloning and gene editing technologies, it might be possible to bring the species back. However, unlike mammoths, woolly rhinos have no close living relatives that could serve as surrogate mothers. But science is advancing rapidly, and perhaps in a few decades, artificial wombs will make it possible to grow the offspring of extinct animals. Sasha is more than a museum specimen. He is a message from a lost world, a reminder that our planet was once home to extraordinary creatures. And perhaps one day, they will walk the earth again. Thanks to a tiny rhino who slept in the Yakutian permafrost for 39,000 years. Not all icy discoveries date back to ancient times. Sometimes ice preserves stories that happened just yesterday in historical terms, but that doesn't make them any less dramatic. On July 11, 1897, from the island of Svalbard, a massive hot air balloon named the Eagle rose into the gray Arctic sky. In the basket were 3 Swedish explorers: Salomon August André, Niels Strindberg, and Knut Frankel. Their goal was so ambitious that many considered it insane: to reach the North Pole by air. The expedition captured the attention of the entire world. André was a renowned engineer and balloonist, inventor of many devices, and fully confident in the success of his venture. He claimed that reaching the pole would take just 43 hours, the return trip even less. The Eagle was a marvel of 1890s technology. Its dome was 66 feet in diameter with a volume of 170,000 cubic feet, making it one of the largest balloons of its time. The basket was outfitted with the latest equipment: sleeping bags, a portable kitchen, scientific instruments, even cameras to photograph the North Pole. André's boldest innovation was a system of steering the balloon using rope sails. He believed he could harness wind currents at different altitudes for navigation. The theory sounded promising, but in practice it was doomed from the start. They carried enough food for 4 months. André planned not only to reach the pole, but to conduct a thorough scientific survey. The basket contained canned goods, biscuits, chocolate, and even bottles of champagne for celebrating their success. Their scientific equipment included thermometers, barometers, cameras, and hundreds of glass spheres containing messages to be dropped during the flight to report their progress. But just 65 hours into the flight, the dream turned into a nightmare. The steering system failed, and the balloon drifted out of control toward the north, gradually losing altitude. The basket repeatedly struck ice floes, damaging the envelope. Finally, the Eagle made a rough landing on drifting pack ice 300 miles from its launch point. The explorers found themselves alone on the endless Arctic ice with minimal survival gear. Ahead lay months of struggle against the elements, hunger, and freezing cold. For 33 years, the fate of André's expedition remained one of the greatest mysteries in polar exploration. Search parties found only scattered clues, a few messages in glass balls, fragments of the balloon, and an old buoy marked André Polar Expedition 1897. Then on August 6, 1930, a Norwegian scientific expedition landed on White Island to replenish fresh water supplies. What they discovered shocked the world. The icy desert had preserved the André expedition camp with eerie precision. A waterproof fabric tent still stood, partially torn by wind. The cooking gear, pots, pans, remnants of food in tins, and scientific instruments. Everything remained in the same place where it had been left 33 years earlier. Next to the camp lay the bodies of all 3 men. André had been buried under a pile of stones. His companions had managed to give him a grave. Strindberg and Frankel lay in their sleeping bags, as if they had peacefully fallen asleep and never woken up. The most valuable discoveries were the expedition diaries and cameras. Remarkably, the film had been preserved well enough to develop 240 photographs documenting the final months of the explorers' lives. These photographs told an astonishing story of heroic survival. The first images showed the optimistic trio next to their wrecked balloon. André in a bowler hat and necktie, Strindberg with a neatly trimmed beard, Frankel in a fur cap. They looked more like men on a Sunday outing than castaways. Later photos documented their epic journey across drifting sea ice. For 3 months they traveled south, dragging sleds with supplies and a boat in case the ice broke apart. Their faces gradually grew gaunt, their clothing tattered and filthy. Diary entries written with trembling hands in pencil revealed the details of their struggle. After the crash, the team tried to reach land on foot. They hunted polar bears and seals, collected seabird eggs, and even ate moss and algae to survive. Strindberg proved to be a skilled hunter. His rifle brought down game that saved the team from starvation. One photo shows him proudly posing next to a dead polar bear, weighing over 660 pounds. That bear's meat fed them for over a week. But the Arctic was merciless. The ice floe they were walking on drifted not south toward land, but north, back toward the pole. After a month of suffering, they found themselves even farther from rescue than when they began. Strindberg's fate was especially tragic. He wasn't just the expedition's photographer. He was also engaged. At home, his fiancée, Anna Charlotta, was waiting for him. The diary included letters to her that he wrote, knowing she would likely never read them. "My dearest Anna," he wrote on October 4th, 1897, "if these words ever reach you, know that my final thoughts were of you. We did everything we could, but the Arctic proved stronger than us." On October 7th, 1897, the expedition finally reached White Island, a desolate scrap of land barely 3 miles long and only 1 mile wide. Exhausted and sick, they were still alive. It seemed the worst was behind them. The island might offer a place to wait out the winter and hope for rescue. The final diary entries are dated mid-October. The explorers built a shelter from stones and canvas and stored polar bear meat for winter. Strindberg even photographed their makeshift home, a low stone structure that looked more like a tomb. What happened next remains a mystery. Most likely they died from trichinosis, a parasite found in undercooked polar bear meat, or perhaps from carbon monoxide poisoning in the confined shelter. Or maybe they simply froze to death when the polar night set in. André died first. His companions managed to bury him under stones. Strindberg and Frankel died almost simultaneously, lying in their sleeping bags. Their deaths were peaceful. No signs of agony were found on their faces. The André expedition lasted 129 days and covered over 600 miles across Arctic ice. They never reached the North Pole, but they completed one of the most heroic journeys in the history of polar exploration. Their photographs and diaries, preserved by the Arctic ice, became a final testament to human courage in the face of a merciless wilderness. These men risked their lives for science and discovery, and even as they were dying, they continued to record observations. The North Pole was finally reached by air in 1926, 29 years after the death of André's team, when Roald Amundsen and Umberto Nobile accomplished what the Swedish inventor had dreamed of, using a dirigible instead of a balloon. André, Strindberg, and Frankel remain on White Island, a monument to human daring and the price of scientific progress. The ice preserved not only their bodies, but the memory of a time when people were willing to die to glimpse beyond the edge of the unknown. The last Arctic story is the most mysterious and controversial. In declassified Cold War archives, there is mention of a discovery that still captivates the imagination of researchers into unexplained phenomena and raises the question, what else lies hidden in the icy depths of our planet? In 1962, during the construction of a secret military base in northern Alaska, an incident occurred that the military tried to keep hidden for over half a century. Workers from the Northland Construction Company were digging a foundation pit for a radar station when an excavator struck something incredible buried in the permafrost. At first, it looked like a typical fossil find, common in Alaska. But as the workers began clearing the area, it became clear this was something entirely different. According to declassified documents and witness accounts that surfaced decades later, the permafrost held the remains of a massive creature unlike any known animal. Official records describe it as a biological entity of unknown origin, measuring 40 feet in length. James McCormick, the bulldozer operator who first saw it, briefly wrote in his diary, "This wasn't a mammoth like the ones we've dug up before. The limbs were too long for any known mammal, and the skull was unnaturally elongated, almost like a crocodile's, but the size of a car." What stunned observers most was the size of the creature. While mammoths stood up to 13 feet tall, this being was twice as large. Its skin had a strange texture, not woolly like a mammoth, nor smooth like a reptile, but covered in horn-like plates resembling an armadillo's armor. Construction foreman Robert Henderson later recalled, "That thing had teeth as long as my arm, not like a herbivore's. These were predator fangs, sharp as razors, and the paws, way too many fingers, and each ended in a claw the size of a dagger." The discovery was immediately classified. Within hours, a helicopter arrived carrying military biologists from a secret lab at Fort Richardson. The entire site was cordoned off, workers were sent on forced leave, and management was ordered to sign non-disclosure agreements valid for 80 years. Dr. Margaret Thompson, a military paleontologist who came to examine the find, later confided in a private conversation, "What we pulled from the ice didn't fit into any known scientific framework. Radiocarbon dating showed it was about 400,000 years old, but the anatomy, it was just impossible. The skeletal structure was especially baffling. The bones were hollow like a bird's but thick like an elephant's. The spine had extra processes not found in any known vertebrate. Most bizarre of all, the skull had cavities that could only serve one purpose, housing a brain the size of a human's." Years later, fragments of the story leaked to the press via former military personnel and scientists. Sergeant David Cole, who guarded the site, claimed, We worked in 3 shifts extracting samples. There were bones like nothing we'd ever seen. Some even glowed green in the dark. Tissue samples yielded even stranger results. The DNA was partially degraded, but the remaining sequences included patterns never found in any known Earth organism. The protein structures were so unusual that 1960s lab equipment couldn't even analyze them. Dr. Edward Clark, who worked on the samples in the secret lab, later wrote in his memoirs, the cellular structure resembled Earth-based life, but was organized according to completely different principles, as if evolution had followed a totally separate path. The most fantastic details concerned alleged technology. Several witnesses mentioned metallic objects found near the remains, plates made of an unknown alloy that resisted analysis and stayed cold even when heated. Sergeant Cole described, there was something like a helmet, but made of a material we couldn't identify. Light as aluminum, strong as steel, and the surface had symbols that didn't match any known writing system. Conspiracy theorists suggest the remains belong to an extraterrestrial being that crashed on Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago. Others think it was a previously unknown terrestrial species that evolved in parallel with mainstream evolutionary lines. Skeptics offer more mundane explanations. Perhaps it was a deformed mammoth carcass or another Ice Age animal, distorted by millennia in the permafrost. Compression from the ice could have warped the skeleton beyond recognition. Geologist Samuel Parker, who worked on the site, proposed a different idea. Maybe it was the remains of an unknown species of ancient reptile that lived during a warmer period in Alaska's history. The Mesozoic deposits in that area are poorly studied, but the size didn't match any known Mesozoic or Cenozoic species. Even the largest dinosaurs rarely exceeded 50 feet, and most Ice Age giants were much smaller. The truth may be far less sensational than the theories. Perhaps the military didn't hide the find because of its strange nature, but simply to avoid drawing attention to a classified construction project during the height of the Cold War. In 1962, any unusual discovery near a military base was automatically classified. Cold War paranoia meant even ordinary paleontological finds were kept secret if they occurred at strategic sites. Dr. Arthur Simmons, a U.S. Air Force geologist, later explained, "In those years, we classified everything. Finding mammoth bones on a military base meant attracting scientists, journalists, maybe even spies. It was easier to cover it all up. Some researchers note that similar discoveries may have happened before, but the public never heard about them. Remote military bases, mining operations, oil rigs, all regularly encounter frozen remains of prehistoric animals. Most such finds go to scientists and become part of the public record. But what if some really do fall outside the bounds of known paleontology? How many secrets are still hidden in Alaska's permafrost?" In 2019, part of the documentation about the Alaska 62 incident was declassified, but key details remain sealed. The official version describes an archaeological find of no scientific significance. But then why are most documents classified until 2042? Former military biologist Daniel Moore said in a 2020 interview, "I saw the photos of that discovery. It wasn't just an unknown animal. It was something that challenged our very understanding of life on Earth." Until those documents are released, the Alaskan giant continues to fuel speculation. This story reminds us that even in our age of total information, our planet still hides countless secrets. Perhaps the truth will turn out to be disappointingly simple. The remains of a prehistoric animal, inflated into legend by military secrecy and human imagination. Or maybe deep in Alaska's permafrost lies something that could change our understanding of history and life itself. The Arctic ice has become a true time machine, preserving the planet's history in stunning detail. The Deloid rotifer revealed the path to biological immortality. Otzi uncovered ancient murder mysteries. Mammoths Lyuba and Yucca opened the door to de-extinction. HMS Terror became a symbol of human courage. The rhino Sasha reminded us of lost worlds. The Andrei expedition showed the harsh price of scientific discovery. And the mysterious Alaskan giant hints at secrets that could transform our understanding of life. But the climate is changing. The ice is melting faster than ever, and each year the permafrost yields new secrets. Who knows what shocking discoveries still lie hidden in the frozen depths of the Arctic? Perhaps even answers to the most fundamental questions about our past, our present, and our future.